Hi, I'm Vicki Hoth from Handi Quilter. In other videos that I've done on the ProStitcher with edge-to-edge quilting, I've showed you how to create the whole quilt, to create the width, create the height, and fill it up with all your designs. Today I want to show you how to do just 2 rows, and the reason for that is that some designs are so intricate, or you want them so tight that it takes a little bit longer for to process it on the tablet, and so you're kind of saying, oh, this is taking too long. But if we only put 2 rows in, then it will not take as long to process. So I want to show you how to do that, and also how to advance those 2 rows so that you're continually advancing, positioning, and getting everything right as far as the spacing between the 2 rows. So let's get started and work out a quilt here. So I've got my fabric loaded, and we're going to bring in a design. So go to Design, go to our Open, and with our continuous line, and I want to just choose a design, not necessarily that it is really intricate and going to be really small and take a lot of processing, but something just so that I can show you how to advance the quilt. So we're going to do something kind of loose in our quilting. So I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to pick this straight line stipple. I have my design, and you can see on the screen that it's 4 inches wide and about almost 4 inches in height, 3.75 in height. I actually want this to be a little bigger, so I want a little less dense quilting. That way it'll quilt faster so we can get on with this process. So the next thing I need to do is I need to create my area. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my area. Press that, make sure that goes on, okay. And then from there I'm going to go up to the left corner and about 1 inch off, and you can see right here. So I'll go about 1 inch off, so I'm going to go ahead, move my machine up, and I'm going to put the machine so that it's going to go right along the top of that stitching. And I've already got this squared up to my frame, so I used my horizontal channel lock, my vertical channel lock, and I've squared all my fabric up. So I'm going to go about 1 inch off, and I'm going to press 2 corner. Now with that, let's press that so that it does it. All right. Now we're going to move the machine over to the right side of the quilt and find the width. And it doesn't matter where I put that as long as I'm someplace here, because I've already measured this fabric, and so I will overwrite that number with the height of it. So I'm going to press 2 corner again. This doesn't want to respond there we go. Okay, so bring this back to the center. So what you can see here is my width is 41.75. It's basically about a 40-inch piece of fabric. My length, or my height of this fabric, is around 42. So I'm going to add a couple of inches. I'm going to take that and put 42. Enter that in. Now when I press my refresh, you can see that that has created my area, and there's my design in that area. Now I'm going to go to Repeat. There we go. Pushing that too hard. Repeat, and I'm in my main, and I want to take this design and fit it in. So I'm going to press the Fit, and it will fill it up. Now that's pretty tight, so I'm going to actually take a few repeats away. And I'm going to take a few repeats away from the height. So you can see it doesn't fill the area. But if I stretch my width and I stretch my height, it filled the area, and then it's a little less dense. And I think, you know what? I think I might take another couple out in my height. And you can see as I take them out, you can see that it's making them longer. So I take those out, and I could take out another repeat here. Now that's going to be pretty loose quilting, but for this we'll just go ahead and do that. Now we talked about, wait a minute, we weren't going to do this whole quilt, but at least I know how this is going to fit in my quilt. So with that, I am going to baseline this. So I've set it as one design, but I don't want any more than 2 rows. So if I go to my quilt, new start end, and if I move this over here to the end of this point here, go right over to there, and start auto, that stop point, I want to move up there. And it did. Now I can go to design, crop, and when I crop this away, it takes away everything except for 2 rows. So now I have those 2 rows, but I've actually created the whole quilt according to how it's going to fit and kind of look in the whole quilt. Now I only have 2 rows to work with. So now as I process, or as I quilt, things will process a little faster. And I'm going to go ahead and baseline that again and go to area and clear out my area. There, I have my 2 rows. Now can I stitch both rows? Go down here. I can get 2 rows, but I can't get anything more than that, but you know, I'm okay. What's really important is I want 1 row, and I know this is where my first row ends. You can see where the crosshair is, so I will have this much space that I can get before I have to adjust, you know, advance my fabric and advance my pattern. So let's go ahead and let's get it quilted. We'll quilt our first row. I'm going to move the machine over here. The machine actually knows where to go, but I kind of like to move it over in the vicinity of where it's going to start quilting. The thing that I do want to do is I want to go to my settings, check my stitches per inch, and I have it at 12, and I'm okay with that. Turn on my tie-off, start my tie-off end, make sure my micro or my tacking is right. Go to my pull-up. I've got my pull-up on, and I'm ready to quilt. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to quilt. Press up. You know, one thing that I really do want to check is because these are really sharp points. I want to go back to my settings. I want to check my speed. My speed is at medium, and that's a good range to have that in. So I'm happy with that. Now I'm ready to go to quilt and run. It brings that up so I can see it again. But I just wanted to make sure everything was set. Proceed. We're going to go ahead and let that move over. Take its pull-up stitch. Then resume, and it'll start and do its tie off. Clip our threads, and now we'll just let this quilt this first row. So sometimes I'll actually use my directional arrow and increase my speed just a little bit. As long as it can increase and still maintain the good sharp corners, then I'm going to be okay. But if I increase it too much and the corners start to get a little wobbly, then I don't like that look. And this is still going really nice. We finished our first row. Now it's doing its tie off, and we're ready to clip the threads. It disables the motor. We're going to go ahead, clip those threads. Now I want to move my machine over to a point in my design. Any point, it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to right here, and you can kind of see this point here. Let me move the thread. I'm going to move and place my needle down right there, okay? Now, before I do anything else, I'm going to press the drag. So what I did is I latched onto the fabric with my needle. Now I want to latch onto the design with my drag button. So I press the drag. I can go ahead and get rid of that long jump. And now I want to advance the fabric so I can take off my side clamps. And I'll come over here and take these off. And I've got a hold of that. I'm going to go ahead and drag. And I'll advance the fabric until I have enough throat space for my next row. Then I'll go ahead, put the side clamps back on, because there wasn't quite as much fabric on these sides. I actually have just created my little extender here with some twill tape and my clamps. You always want to stabilize everything up before you drop the design onto the pattern, or onto the, press the drop button. So everything's going to be stable. Now I want to check again. I want to come up here, and because when I drag this might have a tendency to kind of pull up my fabric. So right up here, I want you to look at this, and you can see how I can actually move this. And as I move this, it also, because I've got the drag on, it will move the pattern. But I want to just make sure that there's no drag. You can see there's a little drag there. I want to make sure it's just nice and smooth. Then I'm going to press the drop button. I press the drop button so it let go of the design. The crosshair no longer is attached to the design. Now I'm going to lift my needle so the machine has let go of the fabric. So they're still in place, and now I can go ahead and stitch down both sides of my quilt. So I can come over here and just stitch that down right as close to that edge as I can. Grab my scissors here and clip that off. Clip this off because we don't want that thread hanging down and catching into our wheel. So I'll put that in my trash. We're going to go ahead and move this over to the right side and do the same thing. Stay very close to that edge of the fabric. Clip my threads. Again, clip these threads here because we don't want to get tangled up into the stitching as it goes along. Okay, place that in the trash. Now we're ready to stitch. Well, what the philosophy here is that we stitch out row 1 and we use row 2 for positioning. So I'm going to go to row 2, the start point of row 2. So as I move my machine over here, I'm going to go to, there is my start point, and that's where it will stitch row 2. But what I want to do is put row 1 in its place. And you'll get this, okay? What I've done is it's given me my placement, and that's what's the most important. That's what we struggle with, is how do I know how much space to put between these? But if I use the row 1 for stitching and the row 2 to place, it always gives me that positioning point. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to just stay right there. Put my needle there if I want to. Now I want to press the cancel or the emergency stop. I want to go to design and to reposition. And now, right now, if I started stitching, I would be stitching row 2. That's not the row I want to stitch. Even though it's the same as row 1, I want to stitch row 1. So if I press start point, it will take the start point, which is row 1, and put it where I am on row 2. This is going to make sense. It really is. There. Okay, it's moved the whole design down. What row are we going to stitch? Row 1. So I'm going to go ahead, lift up my needle. I can just even bring up my bobbin thread, even though when I go to my quilt, it'll do that function for me. But I'm positioned now. to run row 2. I've got all of my settings right. Run, proceed. That's my pull up, resume. Now it's going to do my tie off. So it gave me my positioning. So I know what my space between these two rows are. I have a smaller amount of design on the screen so that it doesn't slow the processing down, so that now I can just go ahead and quilt. So let's trim our threads here. Now we're using row 1 to quilt out our second row. We finished our second row. Now we're going to tie it off. Ready to advance the quilt again. It disabled the motors. Again, we're going to move our machine over to a common spot on the fabric that matches up with the quilt or the design. So I'm going to go ahead and move in here right to this point. You can see the point here. And it could be this point. It doesn't matter as long as there's just a point. Drop my needle and then press the drag button. Now disable or take my clamps off. Again, take both sides off and advance my quilt. And you can see on the screen, as I advance the quilt, you can see the crosshair moving up and the design following it up the screen because I've grabbed a hold of it. So everything moves together up the screen and on the frame. Okay, tension up my poles again. Put my side clamps on. You always want to have your side clamps on. It stabilizes things, the fabric, so things don't change. The next thing I want to do is I want to check my fabric over here and make sure that there's no pulling on the fabric. I want to make sure it's just nice and smooth, and that looks good. Now I'm going to go ahead and drop it, and then I'm going to lift my needle. So everything is in position, but this is my second row. I could stitch it if I wanted, but I don't want to. We're stitching row 1, positioning with row 2. So there's my positioning point. Put my needle right there. Go cancel. Go to my design and use my start point, and it moves that down. Now we're ready to quilt again. Go ahead. The one thing that we didn't do, so we're really not ready to quilt yet, we did not stitch down the sides of our fabric. So again, we need to do that. It doesn't really matter the order, so as long as this is done before we quilt. So this could be done the last part, or it could be done before we actually move the pattern back down again. So, but that's a good order. Again, stitch that. And make sure you're stitching less than a 1/4 inch. Mine's about 1/8 of an inch. That way that we don't have any flapping back of the fabric. If your design, as it stitches off the batting and flaps back in, or stitches back in, it doesn't create the edge to flap over. Now, let's get rid of our thread. Place it in our trash. Now we know, check again, there's my start point. That's where I need to start. And I know I've got enough, right there you can see I've got enough area to do my design. Sometimes it's really important to check that to make sure that you've advanced your fabric far enough that you can get that full row in again. So we're ready to go. We're going to press our quilt, run. It'll move over to that point, take my pull up, and we're ready to go. Let's get quilting again. I hope this helps you understand how you now can do a large quilt but only using 2 rows and advancing and keeping your spacing together, because that's the hardest part, is making sure that we have the correct spacing between each row. Hope this helps you, and have fun quilting.